On February 19, 1947, Rear Admiral Richard E. Byrd climbed into his aircraft at an Arctic research station and took off toward the North Pole. He was 58 years old, a decorated naval officer, an American hero who'd already flown over both poles. This was supposed to be a routine reconnaissance flight. It wasn't. According to a diary that surfaced decades after his death, Byrd didn't fly over the pole that day. He flew into it. The diary describes his instruments failing, the ice below giving way to green valleys, mountains rising where no mountains should exist, animals resembling mammoths, and then disc-shaped craft intercepting his plane, guiding him down to land in an impossible world beneath the ice. There he allegedly met beings who called themselves the Masters of the Inner World. They gave him a warning about humanity's atomic weapons. Then they sent him back to the surface, where military intelligence immediately detained him and ordered his silence. Now, the diary has never been authenticated. Most historians believe it's a hoax, and maybe it is. But here's what we know for certain. Admiral Richard E. Byrd was absolutely real. His polar expeditions are documented historical fact. He flew over the North Pole in 1926, over the South Pole in 1929. He was credible, decorated, trusted. And after 1947, something changed. In a press conference in Chile, just after returning from the Arctic, Byrd made a statement that nobody could quite explain. He spoke of land beyond the pole, not at the pole, but beyond it. He called it an enchanted continent in the sky, a land of everlasting mystery. He claimed there was an area as big as North America that remained unexplored, beyond the pole. Think about that phrase. The North Pole is the northernmost point on Earth. There is no beyond unless you circle back south, unless there's something else there, something we're not supposed to know about. 3 months later, Byrd gave his final interview. He was asked about future expeditions. His answer, "I'd like to see that land beyond the pole. That area beyond the pole is the center of the great unknown." He said it again, beyond the pole. On March 11, 1957, Richard E. Byrd died. Official cause, heart attack. He was 68. By all accounts, he'd been healthy and active. He never explained what he meant. But Byrd wasn't the first person to suggest the poles were more than frozen wasteland, not even close. In 1818, a former U.S. Army captain named John Cleves Simons Jr. sent a declaration to universities and scientific institutions worldwide. It read, "I declare that the earth is hollow and habitable within, containing a number of solid concentric spheres, one within the other, and that it is open at the poles." Sims wasn't a crank. He was a decorated War of 1812 veteran, a traitor, a self-taught scientist. He spent the rest of his life developing his theory, giving lectures across America, petitioning Congress for funding to prove it. He wanted to sail to the North Pole, find the opening, and explore what lay within. He never got his expedition, but his ideas didn't disappear. They influenced Jules Verne's Journey to the Center of the Earth. Edgar Allan Poe wrote about them. Scientists debated them seriously throughout the 19th century. The theory had enough credibility that it took decades to fully discredit. Or did it ever get fully discredited? Because here's something you can verify right now. Open Google Earth. Zoom in on the North Pole. Notice anything strange? The closer you get, the blurrier the image becomes. At a certain point, the satellite imagery simply stops. You get blank white space. The most detailed map of Earth ever created, assembled by the most advanced technology in human history, has a blind spot, right at the top of the world. Official explanation. Satellite orbits don't cover the extreme polar regions perfectly, and the area is just ice anyway, so high-resolution imagery isn't a priority. Camera artifacts, data processing limitations. Fair enough. But then explain this. Commercial aircraft don't fly over the North Pole. Check any flight tracking website. Routes from New York to Hong Kong, London to Tokyo, Los Angeles to Dubai. These flights would save hundreds of miles by crossing directly over the pole. The Great Circle route, the shortest distance between 2 points on a sphere, takes them right over the top. But they don't go there. Every single flight curves around it. Airlines say it's about safety, emergency landing protocols, weather, jet streams, and yet the FAA designates both polar regions as permanent no-fly zones. Not temporary, not conditional, permanent. In 1985, Dr. Mustafa Abdelkader analyzed NASA satellite imagery of both poles. He published findings in a peer-reviewed journal describing unusual dark circular formations at the polar regions, symmetrical, perfectly round, not natural ice formations. NASA's response, camera artifacts. Multiple researchers over the following decades pointed out similar anomalies, dark spots, unusual shadows. In some images, the North Pole appears to have a void at its center. In others, cloud cover obscures it entirely. Conveniently, every time a satellite passes over, you're starting to see the pattern, aren't you? Now let's talk about what Byrd was doing just before his alleged flight into the North Pole, because 9 months earlier he'd led the largest Antarctic expedition in history, Operation Highjump, December 1946. The U.S. Navy deployed 4,700 men, 13 ships, and 33 aircraft to Antarctica. For context, that's more personnel than some World War II naval battles. The official mission: establish an American military presence, test equipment in polar conditions, train personnel for cold weather operations. The mission was scheduled to last 6 to 8 months. It was terminated after 8 weeks. No official explanation was ever given for the early withdrawal. The Navy classified most of the expedition's records. They remain classified to this day. But we have Byrd's statements. In February 1947, he told a reporter, "It is necessary for the USA to take defensive actions against enemy airfighters, which come from the polar regions." He spoke of Antarctica representing a potential threat in the event of a new war, and described the possibility of an invasion by fighters that are able to fly from one pole to the other with incredible speed. Fighters, flying from pole to pole, with incredible speed. This was 1947, before the jet age, before ICBMs, before supersonic flight. What was he talking about? Here's what we know happened during Operation Highjump. Byrd took a combat photographer for a research mission. The expedition carried significant armaments for a research mission, and according to Chilean press reports at the time, never confirmed but never denied by the U.S. military, the task force encountered heavy resistance and suffered casualties. Resistance in Antarctica, the most uninhabited place on Earth. From what? The Navy has never answered that question. Look at photographs from the expedition's return. You can find them in naval archives. Look at the faces of the men. These are combat veterans. They'd seen action in the Pacific, in Europe. They'd seen death. But look at their eyes in these photos. That's not exhaustion. That's something else. 4,700 men went to Antarctica. Not one of them, in 76 years, has ever spoken publicly about what happened there. Not one. Think about the statistical impossibility of that. Nearly 5,000 people and not a single deathbed confession, not a single leaked document, not a single whistleblower. Either they saw nothing unusual, which contradicts Byrd's own statements, or something scared them into permanent silence. Now you might think this is just Cold War paranoia, secret bases, military posturing, classified technology tests. Except this pattern is thousands of years old. Every major culture in human history has legends of a world beneath our feet. The Greeks described Hades, a vast realm underground. The Norse spoke of Svartalfheim, deep beneath the mountains. Hindu texts detail Patala, 7 layers of underground kingdoms. Native American tribes tell of the Ant people, who sheltered their ancestors in subterranean cities during great catastrophes. In Tibetan Buddhism, there is Shambhala, not described as metaphor, not treated as mythology, described as a real place, a hidden kingdom within the earth, accessible through secret passages in the Himalayas. Buddhist texts provide specific geographical markers. Monks have spent centuries searching for the entrance, and they weren't the only ones. Between 1938 and 1939, Nazi Germany sent 5 expeditions to Tibet, not archaeological missions, military expeditions, led by the SS Ahnenerbe, Heinrich Himmler's occult research division. They were looking for something specific, the entrance to the inner earth. They called it Agartha. They brought surveying equipment, ground-penetrating instruments, they mapped cave systems, they interviewed monks, they took thousands of photographs and measurements. Then the war started, and the expedition stopped. Most of the Ahnenerbe leadership died during the war or were executed at Nuremberg, but some disappeared. Senior members of the organization, men who'd been to Tibet, were never found. Not captured, not confirmed dead, just gone. Did they find what they were looking for? Here's what we know. In 1952, Soviet explorers discovered the Derinkuyu underground city in Turkey, 18 stories deep, capable of housing 20,000 people. Ventilation shafts that go down at least 85 meters, but nobody knows how deep they actually go, because the lower levels are still unexplored. The city is at least 2,800 years old, possibly much older, and it's not alone. There are dozens of similar underground cities in the same region, connected by tunnels. Some of these tunnels stretch for miles, perfectly carved through solid rock. Who built them? Why did they go so deep? The standard archaeological explanation is protection from invaders. But you don't dig 18 stories down to hide from surface armies. You dig 18 stories down to hide from something else, or to reach something else. In Kentucky, Mammoth Cave is the longest known cave system on Earth. Over 400 miles have been mapped. Rangers estimate that represents less than half of the total system. Some passages descend so deep that explorers have never reached their bottom. Compasses malfunction in certain areas. There are chambers where the acoustic properties are impossible. Sound behaves in ways that violate known physics. Native American tribes in the region have oral traditions about these caves. They say the tunnels go all the way through the earth. They say their ancestors traveled through them. They say something still lives down there. Myths, right? Primitive superstition. Except in 2007, cavers discovered a new passage in Mammoth Cave. It led to a chamber containing artifacts that carbon dating placed at over 6,000 years old. The chamber showed signs of long-term habitation, and it was 6 miles from the nearest known entrance, through passages so narrow and dangerous that modern cavers needed advanced equipment to navigate them. How did people 6,000 years ago get there? The official explanation, we don't know. So let me lay out what we have. Admiral Byrd, a credible naval officer, speaks repeatedly about land beyond the pole and fighters that can travel between poles with incredible speed. He leads the largest Antarctic expedition in history. It's cut short without explanation. He dies 10 years later, never clarifying what he meant. The North Pole is a documented no-fly zone, with no clear civilian satellite imagery. Nazi Germany sends 5 military expeditions to Tibet, specifically searching for underground entrances. Every ancient culture describes underground realms in strikingly similar terms. We've discovered underground cities that go far deeper than any defensive purpose requires. Cave systems that extend for hundreds of miles, with no known bottom. You can dismiss any one of these things individually. But together? Together they form a pattern. And patterns mean something. In 1829, a Norwegian sailor named Olaf Jansen claimed he and his father sailed through an opening at the North Pole. He described a sun at the Earth's center, vast oceans, advanced civilizations. He was institutionalized for his claims. His story was filed away as the delusions of a madman. But here's the thing about Olaf Jansen. Before his polar voyage, he was a reliable merchant sailor with an unblemished record. After his voyage, he never changed his story. Not under interrogation, not under medical examination, not even on his deathbed. He insisted, until the day he died, that he'd been inside the Earth. Why would a sane man, with everything to lose, maintain an elaborate lie for 60 years? Unless it wasn't a lie. I'm not telling you to believe in hollow Earth. I'm telling you to look at what we can't explain. The gaps in the maps, the classified expeditions, the ancient cities that go impossibly deep. The stories that repeat across every culture. The pieces are there. They've always been there. We've just been told not to look. Admiral Byrd died in 1957. His final words, according to his son, were about Antarctica, about unfinished business, about something he needed to tell the world but couldn't. He never got the chance. But in 1989, on the other side of the planet, Soviet scientists tried a different approach. They didn't look for natural openings. They decided to dig. They drilled down 12 kilometers into the Earth's crust, deeper than anyone had ever gone, deeper than anyone has gone since. And then suddenly they stopped. The project was abandoned. The site was sealed. The scientists were dispersed. They never explained why. That's where we're going next. The Kola Peninsula, northwestern Russia, 1970. Soviet scientists began drilling a hole into the Earth's crust, not for oil, not for minerals, for knowledge. They called it the Kola Superdeep Borehole, and the goal was simple: drill deeper than anyone had ever drilled before, reach depths where no human had ever taken samples, find out what our planet is actually made of. The project was a point of national pride, Soviet engineering versus the Earth itself. They had the technology, the funding, the best geologists in the USSR. American scientists had tried something similar with Project Moholy in 1961 and failed, barely reaching 180 meters before the drill collapsed. The Soviets were determined to succeed. For 19 years they drilled. By 1989 they'd reached 12,262 meters. That's 7.6 miles straight down. The deepest hole ever created by human hands. They'd broken records. They'd gathered data that rewrote geology textbooks. They'd found liquid water at depths where water shouldn't exist. They'd discovered microbial fossils 6.7 billion years old, older than the Earth itself, according to our current models. The drill was still going. The team was celebrating. They were planning to reach 15,000 meters, and then, without warning, they stopped. The official explanation came months later, buried in a brief scientific report. The temperature at depth exceeded our projections. The drill bit could not withstand the heat. The project has been suspended. Suspended, not terminated, suspended. They sealed the borehole with a heavy metal cap. They dismantled the equipment, they dispersed the team to other projects, and they never went back. That was 1992, 32 years ago. The Soviet Union collapsed. Russia opened up. Funding became available for all kinds of projects. Drilling technology advanced dramatically. But nobody ever returned to Kola. Nobody ever tried to drill deeper. The site sits abandoned, rusting, overgrown with weeds. The deepest hole ever dug, and we just walked away from it. Why? Let's examine the official explanation. Temperature. The drill reached rocks that were 180 degrees Celsius, far hotter than their models predicted. The rock at that depth had the consistency of plastic from the heat and pressure. Conventional drilling couldn't continue. Fair enough. Except the Soviets had already planned for high temperatures. They'd designed specialized drill bits. They'd budgeted for equipment upgrades. This was the flagship project of Soviet geology. They weren't going to abandon it over an engineering challenge they'd anticipated from the start. And here's the thing, they didn't gradually wind down the project. They stopped suddenly, mid-drill. The last entry in the chief geologist's log is dated September 1992. It's a routine technical note about drill bit replacement. The next document is the closure order, nothing in between. No explanation of what changed, no detailed analysis of why continuing was impossible. Just stop drilling, seal it up, leave. That's not how science works. That's how cover-ups work. So what really happened down there? In 1989, a story began circulating. It started in Finnish Christian newsletters, then spread to American tabloids. The story claimed that Soviet scientists had drilled into hell, that they'd lowered microphones into the borehole and recorded screaming. The screams of millions of damned souls. The scientists, terrified, had fled the site. Audio recordings accompanied the story. Terrible, agonized screaming. Wailing. The sounds of torment. The story was later debunked. The audio was traced to a 1972 horror movie soundtrack. The witness testimony came from a Norwegian teacher who admitted he'd fabricated the story as a commentary on religious gullibility. So it was fake. A hoax. Nothing to it. Except ask yourself, why did this story spread so effectively? Why did it persist for years when most tabloid nonsense disappears in a week? Why do people still reference the sounds from hell decades later? Maybe because on some level, people sensed there was something wrong about Kola, something that wasn't being discussed. The hoax filled a vacuum where the truth should have been. Here's what we know the Soviets actually found. At 7,000 meters, they discovered water, not trapped in porous rock, actual flowing water, heavily mineralized, moving through the rock under immense pressure. According to every geological model, water cannot exist in liquid form at that depth. The pressure and temperature should make it impossible. The rock should be completely solid, compressed beyond any porosity. But the water was there, and they couldn't explain where it was coming from. They described it in their reports as of unknown origin. 7 kilometers down, they found water from a source they couldn't identify. At 9,000 meters, they found fossils, microscopic plankton, fossilized in metamorphic rock. But when they carbon dated these organisms, the results didn't make sense. The dates came back older than the rock formation surrounding them, in some cases older than the current accepted age of Earth's crust in that region. The findings were published in a single obscure Soviet geology journal in 1991, then never mentioned again. When Western scientists requested the samples for independent verification, they were told the samples had been lost during administrative reorganization. All of them. Lost. At 12,000 meters, their seismic sensors detected something that shouldn't exist. Below the drill bit, the sensors showed cavities in the rock. Not small voids or natural fissures, large spaces, hollow regions that defied everything we know about geology at that depth. Solid rock under that much pressure doesn't have cavities. It can't. The pressure would collapse any void instantly, like a submarine imploding in the Mariana Trench, unless something was keeping those spaces open. The drill team reported acoustic anomalies, sounds coming up through the borehole that didn't match any known geological process, not the crack of shifting rock or the hiss of escaping gas. Low-frequency sounds, rhythmic. One engineer, in a report that was later redacted, described it as similar to a biological rhythm. These reports exist. They're in Russian geological archives, partially declassified in 2004. They've been translated. You can find them if you look hard enough. The sections describing what happened next are still classified. Then in April 1992, something changed. The drill broke through into a cavity. For 7 hours, the drill spun freely. It had penetrated into open space. The team lowered measuring instruments down. Temperature sensors registered a spike to over 2,000 degrees Celsius, then failed completely. They lowered a reinforced microphone, standard procedure for acoustic testing of rock density and composition. 3 people have spoken about what was on that recording. Not officially, not on the record in any way that could be verified, but their accounts align. Dmitry Azakov, a technician on the project, emigrated to Israel in 1995. In 2003, he was interviewed by a German radio journalist about his work in Soviet geology. Near the end of the interview, he was asked about Kola. His response was brief. We lowered a microphone. We heard movement. Not rock, not gas, movement, and something else. Clicks, rhythmic like sonar. Like something was listening to us. The journalist pressed him. Azakov ended the interview. He died 5 years later. Heart attack. He was 52. In 2011, another team member, whose name was never published, told a Russian newspaper, there was a sound like wind, but not wind, like something breathing. The frequency was too low for human ears, but the instruments picked it up. It pulsed, 0.7 to 0.9 hertz, a heartbeat rhythm. The article was removed from the newspaper's website within 48 hours, and a Ukrainian geologist who worked on data analysis, interviewed in 2016, said only, whatever we found down there, Moscow didn't want us talking about it. We were told the recordings were corrupted. We were told to forget it. Most of us did. 6 days after the drill broke through into the cavity, orders came from Moscow. Cease all operations immediately. The project was terminated, not suspended. The official paperwork said suspended, but everyone on site knew. This was over. Now, I can't confirm those recordings exist. The Soviet government never released them. If they're in an archive somewhere, they're buried deep. The scientists who heard them are mostly dead or silent, but I can confirm this. The project ended abruptly, despite being on the verge of unprecedented success. The site was sealed in a way that makes restarting prohibitively difficult, and in the 32 years since, despite advances in drilling technology that would make reaching 15,000 meters easier than it was to reach 12,000 in 1989, nobody has tried. Not Russia, not the United States, not China, not private industry. The deepest active borehole today is approximately 12,000 meters, roughly the same depth Kola reached. Only one country tried to go deeper after Kola, Japan. In 2012, the Chikyu deep-sea drilling vessel attempted to reach the mantle. Japan, the nation that engineered the bullet train that rebuilt after Fukushima, that operates some of the most sophisticated technology on Earth, couldn't keep the drill running. At 7,740 meters, they experienced unexpected equipment failures. The project was suspended indefinitely. It's as if there's an unspoken agreement. We don't go deeper than 12 kilometers. Why? Consider what we actually know about Earth's interior. Everything we know comes from indirect measurement, seismic waves from earthquakes, magnetic field analysis, mathematical models. We've never actually seen below the crust. We've never taken a sample from the mantle. We've certainly never seen the core. Our deepest hole, Kola, penetrated 12 kilometers. The Earth's radius is 6,371 kilometers. We've explored 0.2% of the way to the center. Put it this way. If Earth were an apple, we haven't even broken the skin. If it were a swimming pool, we've wet our fingertip. We know more about the surface of Mars than we know about what's 50 miles beneath your feet right now. And that 0.2% we did reach, it contradicted our models. The water that shouldn't be there, the fossils that shouldn't be that old, the heat that shouldn't be that intense, the cavities that shouldn't exist. Every assumption we had about what's down there was challenged, so what else are we wrong about? The standard model says Earth has a solid inner core of iron and nickel, a liquid outer core, a semi-solid mantle, and a thin crust. This model is based entirely on mathematical interpretation of seismic wave data. We've never verified it directly, but seismic data can be interpreted in different ways. In 2005, geophysicists at UC Berkeley published findings in the journal Science, showing that seismic waves passing through Earth's core behaved unexpectedly. Some waves accelerated when they should have slowed, others slowed when they should have accelerated. The patterns didn't match a uniform solid or liquid core. Their conclusion, Earth's core is far more complex and heterogeneous than current models suggest. The data is consistent with the presence of structural anomalies in regions of unexpectedly low density, structural anomalies, scientific language for, there might be spaces down there we don't understand. The paper was published in one of the most prestigious journals in the world. It received minimal media coverage and was quickly forgotten. In 2013, Canadian researchers discovered that Earth's core is leaking. Helium-3, an isotope that only exists in the deep core, is escaping to the surface at rates far higher than our models predict. The only explanation? There are pathways from the core to the crust that we haven't accounted for. Channels, fissures, routes we don't understand. Where are these pathways? How large are they? Do they connect to the surface? Nobody knows. Or nobody's saying. Then there's the ringwoodite discovery. In 2014, scientists confirmed that a mineral called ringwoodite, found 400 to 660 kilometers deep in Earth's mantle, contains enormous amounts of water, not water vapor, not chemically bound hydrogen and oxygen, actual H2O locked in crystalline structure, the estimated volume, 3 times the amount of water in all surface oceans combined. 3 times. There is an ocean beneath our feet larger than the Pacific, Atlantic, and Indian Oceans combined. It's hundreds of kilometers down, trapped in rock, but water finds cracks, water flows, water carves spaces over geological time. What if that underground ocean isn't entirely trapped? What if there are places where it pools, where it collects in vast subterranean reservoirs? The Kola team found flowing water at 7 kilometers. They found cavities at 12 kilometers. They heard sounds that didn't match any known geological process. Then they sealed it up and walked away. But they weren't the only ones who encountered the barrier. The Germans drilled the KTB borehole in Bavaria. Reached 9,101 meters in 1994. Found unexpected water at depths where the rock should be impermeable. Found temperatures higher than models predicted. Encountered equipment malfunctions that couldn't be explained. Stopped. Never resumed. The Americans drilled the Bertha Rogers hole in Oklahoma, reaching 9,583 meters in 1974. It was the deepest hole in the world until Kola surpassed it. They stopped drilling when they hit a region of molten sulfur that destroyed the drill bit. But that's not the full story. Declassified reports mention anomalous seismic readings and unexpected void spaces detected below the drill. The project was quietly terminated. Different continents, different geological conditions, different teams. Same results. Anomalies around 10 to 12 kilometers, then sudden project termination. It's not a technology problem. We drill deeper than 12 kilometers horizontally for oil extraction constantly. We have the equipment. We have the knowledge. It's a choice. A consistent global choice to not go deeper. The Kola site still exists. You can visit it, technically, though it's in a remote, restricted area. Urban explorers have photographed it over the years. The buildings are collapsing. The equipment is rusted beyond recognition, but the borehole itself is still sealed. That heavy metal cap, welded in place in 1992, is still there, and according to locals in the nearby village of Zapolyarny, there are still occasional military patrols in the area, 32 years later, guarding an abandoned hole in the ground. Locals have a name for the site. They call it Kolskaya Skvazhina Golosov, the Well of Voices. Ask them why, and they won't elaborate, but they won't go near it. Not in summer, not in daylight. They say the ground hums at night. They say compasses don't work properly within a kilometer of the site. In 2008, a Russian documentary crew attempted to film at Kola. They were denied permits by the regional government. They went anyway, filming from public roads. When they approached the sealed borehole, their equipment malfunctioned, cameras shut down. Audio recorders produced only static. Their compass spun continuously. One crew member, interviewed years later, said, "There was a sound, not loud, but constant. A low hum coming from below, and the air felt wrong. Thick, pressure in your chest, like something was breathing underneath us." In 2017, a geology student from Moscow visited Kola for his thesis on abandoned Soviet industrial sites. He brought a consumer-grade microphone and lowered it on a cable 100 meters down the sealed borehole, as deep as the cable would reach. He recorded for 20 minutes. Then he posted the audio file online with minimal description. Kola borehole, 100 meters depth. Listen at 1840. The file is still available. You can find it if you search. 19 minutes of silence, static, and wind noise. Then in the last 40 seconds, a low-frequency hum. Not mechanical, not constant. It pulses. The waveform analysis shows a rhythm of 0.8 hertz, just below the range of human hearing. But you can feel it. The video has 127,000 views. The comments section was disabled within a week. The student's account went inactive shortly after. He never posted again. His university has no record of him completing his thesis. The Soviets drilled the deepest hole in history. They found water from an unknown source. They found fossils that don't match our timeline. They discovered evidence of vast hollow spaces that shouldn't exist. They detected sounds that don't match any known geology. They broke through into something at 12 kilometers, and then they buried it, literally welded it shut and walked away. If there's nothing down there but rock and heat, why not go back? Why not finish what they started? Why does the deepest hole humanity ever created sit abandoned and guarded, sealed with metal and silence? Why do the locals call it the Well of Voices? Because maybe Admiral Byrd was looking in the wrong direction. Maybe the openings at the poles aren't the only way in. Maybe the entrance to the inner earth isn't horizontal. Maybe it's vertical. Maybe it's straight down. And maybe, in April 1992, at 12,262 meters beneath the Kola Peninsula. We didn't stop because we couldn't go deeper. Maybe we stopped because something down there didn't want us to. If you're going to hide something big, you don't hide it in one place. You hide it everywhere. You make it so vast, so distributed, that people see the pieces but never connect them. What if that's exactly what we're looking at? Derinkuyu, Turkey, 1963. A man is renovating his basement. Routine work, knocking down a wall to expand his storage space. The wall crumbles. Behind it, darkness. Not another room, a tunnel. He grabs a flashlight and follows it down. The tunnel opens into a chamber. The chamber connects to another tunnel. That tunnel leads to more chambers, and they keep going. Down and down and down. By the time archaeologists arrived, he'd discovered something impossible. An underground city, 18 stories deep, carved entirely from solid volcanic rock, capable of housing 20,000 people. Not a cave, not a natural formation, a city, with ventilation shafts, freshwater wells, storage rooms, livestock stables, wineries, chapels, and schools. All of it underground. All of it engineered with precision that shouldn't exist in the ancient world. The ventilation system alone is a masterpiece of engineering. 52 air shafts, some reaching 85 meters deep, designed to provide fresh air to the lowest levels. The mathematical calculations required to ensure proper airflow at that depth, accounting for pressure differentials, air density, circulation patterns, wouldn't be formally understood for another 2,000 years. Yet there it was, working perfectly. Archaeologists dated the city to approximately 8th century BCE, though some evidence suggests it could be much older. The local Hittite population might have expanded it, but they didn't create it. The deepest levels show construction techniques that don't match any known Hittite methods. Someone else built the bottom floors, someone earlier. The standard explanation: ancient people dug these cities as hiding places. Protection from invaders, Persians, Romans, Arab raiders, depending on which period you're discussing. But here's the problem with that theory. You don't dig 18 stories down to hide from surface armies. Think about the logistics. To hide from invaders, you need quick access, a basement, maybe 2 levels deep, with multiple exits for escape. You need something you can seal quickly and abandon if necessary. Derinkuyu is the opposite. The deeper you go, the more complex it becomes. The lowest levels are the most sophisticated, with the most advanced engineering. The ventilation shafts at the bottom required more effort to construct than the entire upper city. You don't put your best engineering in the place that's hardest to reach unless that place is the most important, unless the bottom levels aren't shelters, unless they're meant to go somewhere. Because here's what the official reports don't emphasize. The lowest levels of Derinkuyu have never been fully explored. They're flooded now, groundwater seepage accumulated over millennia. But before they flooded, they went deeper, much deeper. In several places, archaeologists found sealed passages, blocked with rubble. When they cleared some of these passages, they found tunnels continuing downward at steep angles, not horizontal escape routes. Descending passages. One tunnel was traced for over 3 kilometers before the excavation was halted. It was heading down, sloping at approximately 30 degrees toward something. The Turkish government closed that excavation in 1969. The official reason: structural instability, but they stationed permanent guards at the site. Still there today, 54 years later, and Derinkuyu isn't alone. Within a 50-kilometer radius, archaeologists have found over 200 similar underground cities. Different sizes, different layouts, but all with the same features: multiple levels, advanced ventilation, and passages that go deeper than official excavations have followed. Some of these cities are connected by tunnels, miles of tunnels, carved through solid bedrock, wide enough for several people to walk abreast. Where do these tunnels go? In 2013, construction workers in the nearby city of Nevşehir broke through into another underground complex, larger than Derinkuyu. Preliminary ground-penetrating radar suggested it could house up to 70,000 people and extends at least 113 meters down. That's 37 stories. The Turkish government immediately halted construction. They haven't finished excavating it. They've barely started. But the radar data revealed something that made them stop. The tunnels don't end at 113 meters. They continue beyond the range of the equipment, and some of them angle downward, deeper than the radar can penetrate. The site is now fenced, guarded, officially designated as a future archaeological park, but no excavation has resumed, and when local researchers requested permission to use deeper penetrating ground radar, the permits were denied, no explanation given. Now let's go somewhere else, somewhere older, somewhere that raises questions nobody wants to answer. Mammoth Cave, Kentucky, the longest known cave system on Earth. Over 420 miles have been mapped and surveyed. Park rangers estimate that represents less than half the total system. It's a tourist attraction. Families take guided tours through the upper chambers. It's safe, well lit, controlled, but the map sections are just the beginning. There are passages in Mammoth Cave that go deep, very deep. Some descend so far that exploration teams have never reached the bottom. Equipment fails in certain sections. Compasses spin uselessly. GPS signals vanish. Radio communication cuts out. There are chambers where sound behaves impossibly. Acoustic dead zones where you can shout and hear nothing, standing right next to someone. And whispering galleries where a voice carries 300 feet with perfect clarity, but can't be heard 10 feet away. Physics says this shouldn't happen. The rock composition doesn't explain it. The chamber shapes don't account for it. But it happens. Native American tribes in the region, Cherokee, Shawnee, Chickasaw, have oral histories about Mammoth Cave. They don't call it Mammoth Cave. They have older names, names that translate roughly to the passage through or the road below the world. Their legends say the tunnels go all the way through the earth, that their ancestors used these passages to travel vast distances underground, emerging in lands far away. They say something still lives in the deep sections, something old, something that doesn't want to be disturbed. When European settlers first asked about the caves, tribal elders warned them, don't go deep, the upper caves are safe, but below a certain depth you're in something else's territory. The settlers ignored them, of course they did. In 2007, a team of experienced cavers discovered a new passage in Mammoth Cave. The entrance was a narrow crack in a chamber that had been mapped decades earlier. Nobody had noticed it before because it was partially hidden behind a rock formation and required climbing equipment to reach. 3 cavers, Sarah Lindley, Marcus Chen, and David Petroff, squeezed through the crack and found a passage. It descended steeply, requiring rappelling gear. It led through sections filled with water that had to be navigated in wetsuits. It involved vertical climbs in total darkness. They followed it for 11 hours. The passage eventually opened into a large chamber. When they measured their position using depth gauges and GPS coordinates from before they lost signal, they calculated they were 6 miles from the nearest known entrance to Mammoth Cave, 6 miles through unmapped passages, and in that chamber they found artifacts, pottery fragments, primitive tools made from bone and stone, the remnants of torches, wood that had been burned, covered in some kind of resin. They collected samples and marked the location. When they returned to the surface and reported the find, Park Service archaeologists were dispatched. The artifacts were carbon dated, over 6,000 years old. People had been living in that chamber, not passing through, living there. The distribution of artifacts suggested long-term habitation, sleeping areas, food preparation areas, a community, 6,000 years ago, 6 miles from the entrance, through passages that modern cavers, with ropes and lights and GPS and training, barely managed to navigate. How? The official report from the National Park Service noted the discovery, cataloged the artifacts, and stated, "The method by which the inhabitants accessed this location remains unclear." That was 2007. No follow-up study was ever published. But Sarah Lindley kept exploring. In 2019, she returned to Mammoth Cave with a small team. Not an official expedition, just experienced cavers with permits for a recreational trip. They went back to the chamber they'd found in 2007 and pushed deeper. There was another passage leading down from the chamber, steeper, more difficult. They descended for hours, going deeper into the cave system than any official survey had ever mapped. At a depth they estimated at over 400 feet below the known system. Their gauges had malfunctioned, so the exact depth is uncertain. They found something that shouldn't exist. Worked stone, not natural formations, not mineral deposits, carved blocks, fitted together. The precision wasn't crude. It was exact. The blocks interlocked without mortar, fitted so tightly that a knife blade couldn't slip between them. Ancient construction techniques, but not primitive. Advanced, deep below a natural cave system, in a place that official maps said was solid bedrock. They tried to continue deeper. The passage kept going, angling down, but then their equipment started failing. LED headlamps flickered. Battery-powered lights dimmed despite fresh batteries. The backup radio filled with static. And then they heard it, a sound from deeper in the passage. Low frequency, a vibration they felt in their chest more than heard with their ears. Rhythmic, pulsing. Sarah described it later as like a heartbeat, but too slow. Maybe one beat every 2 seconds, and underneath it, something else. A hum, resonating through the stone. They stopped. They listened for several minutes. The sound continued, steady, unnatural. Marcus wanted to keep going. Sarah overruled him. They turned back. The ascent took 9 hours. When they emerged, Sarah filed a report with the Park Service describing what they'd found. The worked stone, the depth, the anomalous sounds. The response came 3 weeks later. The passage was marked on internal maps as indefinitely closed. Reason stated, unstable geological formations present safety risk. Sarah requested clarification. She's a professional geologist. She wanted to know what specific instability had been identified, because she hadn't observed any during the descent. The Park Service declined to provide details. When she asked if she could review the geological survey that identified the instability, she was told no such survey had been conducted. She was told the closure was a precautionary measure based on general risk assessment protocols. The passage is sealed now, not with a gate or a warning sign. Sealed. They filled the entrance with concrete. For a natural cave passage that tourists were never going to access anyway, that's an unusual level of permanent closure. I reached out to Sarah Lindley while researching this. She agreed to speak briefly. She wouldn't go into detail about what she saw. She said she'd signed an agreement with the Park Service as a condition of keeping her exploration permits, but she did say this: whatever is down there, it goes much deeper than the official maps show, and the worked stone we found, that wasn't recent, that wasn't even medieval. The weathering patterns, the mineral deposits on the surface, that stonework is old, thousands of years old at least. Someone was building down there when, according to our history, people were barely using stone tools on the surface. She paused, then added, and that sound, I've been caving for 23 years. I've heard rock falls, underground rivers, wind through passages, bats, everything. That wasn't any of those things. That was something else. I asked what she thought it was. I don't know, she said, but whatever it was, it didn't want us there. I could feel it. We all could. That's why we turned back. Sarah Lindley hasn't returned to Mammoth Cave since 2019. Now, let's talk about the people who took these underground spaces seriously enough to send military expeditions looking for them. The Nazis. Between 1938 and 1939, Nazi Germany's Ahnenerbe, the SS organization dedicated to researching Germanic history and the occult, sent 5 separate expeditions to Tibet. These weren't archaeological research trips. They were military operations led by SS officers, funded directly by Heinrich Himmler. They brought surveying equipment, ground-penetrating instruments, geologists, military cartographers, and armed escorts. They were looking for Shambhala, not as a metaphor, not as a spiritual concept, as a real place, a hidden kingdom beneath the Himalayas, accessible through specific passages that Buddhist texts described in geographic detail. This wasn't fringe belief among a few occult enthusiasts. This was official SS policy, approved at the highest levels. Himmler himself reviewed the expedition reports. Hitler was briefed on the findings. The expeditions interviewed Tibetan monks, particularly those from monasteries claiming to guard ancient knowledge. They mapped cave systems in the Himalayas. They measured magnetic anomalies. They took thousands of photographs and geological samples. And according to declassified OSS documents from after the war, they found something. The expeditions returned with maps, with coordinates, with descriptions of passages that led deep into the mountains, not caves formed by water erosion, but tunnels, constructed tunnels carved through solid rock, descending at precise angles. Some of these tunnels were blocked, sealed with stone that the monks said had been placed there in the time before memory, to keep something in, or keep something out. The Nazi expeditions requested permission to excavate these sealed passages. The monks refused. Himmler considered sending a military force to take the sites by force, but the logistical challenges of operating in the Himalayas made it impractical. Then the war started. The expedition stopped. Resources were redirected to the war effort. Most of the Ahnenerbe leadership were executed at Nuremberg or died during the fall of Berlin, but some disappeared. Senior members of the organization, men who had been to Tibet, men who had seen the maps, men who knew the coordinates, were never found, not captured by Allied forces, not confirmed dead in the war. They simply vanished. The standard explanation: they fled to South America, like other Nazi war criminals, Mengele, Eichmann, others. But here's what doesn't fit. The men who disappeared weren't high-value targets. They weren't war criminals that Allied forces were actively hunting. They were researchers, archaeologists, geologists. Nobody was looking for them specifically. They could have blended into post-war Germany with false papers, like thousands of others did, but they didn't. They disappeared completely, and none of them ever surfaced, even decades later when it would have been safe. Where did they go? In 1952, a CIA memo, declassified in 2001, referenced persistent rumors among Tibetan refugee communities of German nationals living in monastery complexes in remote regions of Tibet and Nepal. The memo noted that these rumors were unverified and likely apocryphal, but deemed them worth documenting. Why would Tibetan refugees independently report seeing Germans in remote monasteries 7 years after the war ended? And why would some of those reports specifically mention that these Germans were seen entering and exiting passages in the mountains that local people avoided? The CIA memo concluded, no actionable intelligence, low priority for follow-up. It was never followed up, because here's the thing about Shambhala. Tibetan Buddhist texts don't describe it as allegory. They describe it geographically. They provide landmarks, directional instructions, distances. The texts say Shambhala is beneath the mountains, that it's accessed through hidden passages guarded by monks who have taken vows of secrecy, that the kingdom exists in a vast underground realm, lit by a source that isn't the sun. When you ask Tibetan monks about Shambhala, they don't speak philosophically, they speak practically. Some monasteries claim to guard entrance passages. They won't say where, but they'll tell you it's real. It's there, beneath the Himalayas. Why would an entire religious tradition, spanning over 1,000 years, maintain such specific geographic claims about a mythological place? Unless it's not mythology, every major culture in human history has described underground realms. The Greeks, Hades; the Norse, Svartalfheim, home of dwarves beneath the mountains; the Hindu, Patala, 7 layers of kingdoms below the surface; the Hopi, cities built by the ant people underground, where their ancestors sheltered during cataclysms. Different cultures, different continents, different eras, no contact between them, same core story. There is a world below, beings live there, entrances exist, hidden and guarded. That's not archetypal psychology, that's not universal metaphor, that's a pattern. And when we map the physical evidence, Derinkuyu, Mammoth Cave, the Himalayan passages the Nazis documented, the sealed tunnels beneath temple complexes, the cave systems on every continent that descend deeper than we've explored, something appears. The sites cluster along tectonic plate boundaries, along magnetic anomaly zones, along the deep underground water channels revealed by ringwoodite studies from Chapter 2. In 2015, a group of independent geologists used publicly available satellite data to map subsurface density anomalies worldwide. They found hundreds of unexplained low-density regions, hollow spaces deep underground, in locations where natural cave formation is geologically impossible. They published their findings on an open-access website with interactive maps showing the anomaly locations. Within 6 days, the website was hit with a sustained DDoS attack that took it offline. When it came back up 2 weeks later, the interactive map feature had been removed. The researchers received a cease and desist letter threatening legal action for misrepresentation of government-licensed geological data. The data they used was public, available to anyone. But apparently, connecting those data points into a pattern was problematic. The researchers complied, the project was abandoned, but the data still exists. And if you know where to look, you can still find the archive maps. And when you overlay those subsurface anomalies with the locations of ancient underground structures, something becomes clear. The ancient sites aren't random. They're positioned directly above the largest subsurface voids, as if they were built there deliberately, not as shelters dug downward, as access points to something that was already there. Derinkuyu doesn't end at 18 stories. The flooded levels go deeper. The sealed passages lead somewhere. Mammoth Cave doesn't stop where the maps say it does. Sarah Lindley found worked stone 400 feet below the known system, and the passage kept going. The Himalayan tunnels that Nazi expeditions documented weren't dead ends. They were sealed, deliberately, by people who wanted to make sure nobody went through. What were they sealing? What were they keeping out? Or what were they keeping in? Because maybe the network isn't something humans built. Maybe humans found it. Maybe ancient civilizations discovered these passages, these vast hollow spaces beneath the earth, and built their cities on top of the entrances. Maybe they went down into the network. Maybe some of them never came back. And maybe the ones who did come back brought knowledge, engineering techniques that shouldn't exist, stories of underground kingdoms, warnings about going too deep. Maybe that's why every culture has the same legends, because they weren't myths, they were memories. And maybe that's why governments seal the passages when we find them, why deep excavations are halted, why researchers who map the pattern are threatened. Because if there's a network down there, ancient, vast, connected, then the next question becomes inevitable. Is it empty, or does something live there? In 2004, off the coast of San Diego, the USS Nimitz carrier group tracked an object on sonar. It was moving, fast, not on the surface, below the surface, deep below. The object was tracked for 3 days. It moved through the water at speeds that no known submarine could match. It descended to depths that would crush any human-made vessel, and then it went down, deeper, beyond the range of the sonar, and disappeared. Not up, toward the surface. Down, into the network. That's where we're going next. November 14th, 2004. Pacific Ocean, 100 miles off San Diego. The USS Princeton detects something on radar. Multiple objects descending from 80,000 feet to sea level in less than a second. No heat signature, no propulsion system, moving in ways that violate physics. F/A-18. Super Hornets are scrambled. Commander David Fravor intercepts one of the objects. He's a veteran pilot with 16 years of experience. He's seen everything the Navy flies. This isn't that. The object is white, oblong, approximately 40 feet long. No wings, no exhaust, no rotors. It hovers, then moves with instant acceleration. When Fravor tries to cut it off, the object anticipates his maneuver, mirroring his flight path, then vanishing in a blur of speed. Fravor's testimony, given under oath before Congress in 2023. It performed maneuvers that were impossible with our current technology. It had no visible means of propulsion, and then it did something we didn't expect. It dropped into the ocean, not near the ocean, into it. Multiple personnel aboard the Princeton watched it descend below the surface. Sonar tracked it continuing downward at high speed, faster than any submarine, deeper than any manned vessel could survive. Then it disappeared. Not up, toward the sky. Down, beyond sonar range, into the depths. Commander Fravor's encounter lasted 5 minutes. It was recorded on multiple systems. The Pentagon declassified the footage in 2017. The incident is now officially acknowledged. But here's what the headlines missed. The Princeton had been tracking underwater objects for 3 days before Fravor's flight. Fast-moving contacts, deep, behaving like nothing in the Navy's database. They called them USOs, unidentified submerged objects. The 2004 incident wasn't isolated. It was part of a pattern. In 1997, NOAA detected a sound in the Pacific Ocean, ultra-low frequency, loud enough to be recorded by sensors over 5,000 kilometers apart. They called it the bloop. The sound didn't match any known geological event. Earthquakes sound different. Underwater volcanoes sound different. Ice calving, NOAA's eventual explanation, sounds different. Acoustic engineers who analyzed the recording said the frequency profile matched something biological, a living creature, but impossibly large, orders of magnitude bigger than a blue whale. The sound originated from 50 degrees south, 100 degrees west, the South Pacific. Ocean depth at that location, over 4,000 meters, directly above one of the largest subsurface voids ever detected on seismic surveys. A hollow space, deep beneath the ocean floor, that shouldn't exist according to standard geology. NOAA closed the case. Iceberg calving. Official explanation. The seismic data showing the void beneath the bloop's origin point was never mentioned. July 26, 2023. Washington, D.C. David Grusch, former intelligence official with the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, testifies before the House Oversight Committee. Under oath, on record, his statement, the U.S. government has retrieved craft of non-human origin. We have been recovering these objects for decades. We possess biological evidence of non-human intelligence. Not aliens, non-human intelligence. When asked directly about extraterrestrial origin, Grusch chooses his words carefully. We have operated under the assumption that these objects are extraterrestrial in nature. I'm not certain that assumption is correct. If not extraterrestrial, then what? Representative Jared Moskowitz asked the question directly. If they're not from space, where are they from? Grusch's response, that's a conversation that requires a classified setting. The hearing moves on. The question isn't answered publicly, but the data answers it. Analysis of UAP reports from the past 70 years shows a clear pattern. The majority of sightings occur near large bodies of water, oceans, lakes, coastal regions, and a statistically significant number describe objects not flying over water, but entering it, submerging, disappearing beneath the surface. In 1967, fishermen in Shag Harbor, Nova Scotia, watched a large object crash into the water. It didn't sink. It descended under control. Lights still visible beneath the surface. Canadian military divers were dispatched. Sonar detected a large object on the ocean floor. By the time divers reached the location, it had moved. Deep water tracking suggested it traveled along the seafloor before disappearing into a trench. Official report, unidentified. In 1991, during the eruption of Popocatépetl volcano in Mexico, multiple witnesses filmed cylindrical objects flying directly into the crater, not near it, into it, descending into an active volcano. The footage exists. It's been analyzed. No explanation has been provided. Oceans, volcanoes. What do they have in common? They're the deepest pathways into the earth. Now connect the data points. Admiral Byrd, 1947, encounters advanced craft in Antarctica, speaks of fighters that can travel from pole to pole with incredible speed. The craft emerged from the ice, from below. Kola Superdeep Borehole, 1992. Soviet team drills to 12 kilometers, detects cavities below. Records anomalous sounds, rhythmic, possibly mechanical, breaks through into an open space. Project immediately terminated. Mammoth Cave, 2019. Experienced cavers descend deeper than map surveys. Find worked stone at 400 plus feet below known levels. Hear low frequency vibrations, pulsing, rhythmic, coming from deeper in the passage. They retreat. The passage is sealed with concrete. Derinkuyu, Turkey, 18-story underground city with passages that descend beyond explored levels. Sealed tunnels that slope downward at angles, suggesting they're meant to reach something far below. Over 200 similar cities in the region, many connected by miles of tunnels through bedrock. The deepest levels remain unexplored. Guarded. Tibet, 1938 to 1939. Nazi SS expeditions map cave systems described in Buddhist texts as entrances to Shambhala, an underground kingdom. The expeditions return with coordinates. Senior expedition members disappear after the war. Never found. CIA memo from 1952 references persistent rumors of German nationals seen near remote Himalayan passages. USS Nimitz, 2004, tracks objects that descend from high altitude into the ocean. Sonar follows them going deep, beyond crush depth, beyond operational range of any known technology. These aren't separate mysteries. This is one phenomenon, encountered at different access points. The craft Byrd saw didn't come from space. They came from below the Antarctic ice. The sounds at Kola weren't geological. The team drilled into something that was already there. The work stone in Mammoth Cave wasn't built by ancient surface humans struggling through impossible passages. It was built by something that lives down there, accessed from below. The underground cities weren't shelters. They were built on top of entrances. Ancient humans found the passages and tried to access what was below, or tried to seal it off. The objects the Navy tracks aren't visiting from distant stars. They're emerging from the ocean depths, from the volcanic vents, from the hollow spaces beneath the crust. The visitors aren't visitors. They're native to Earth. They just don't live on the surface. Here's what governments know and won't say. Earth's interior isn't solid. Seismic data confirms this. Columbia University, 2011. Earth's core contains structural anomalies consistent with hollow spaces. The paper was published, then quietly forgotten. Earth's mantle contains vast water reserves. Ringwoodite study, 2014. 3 times the volume of all surface oceans, trapped in crystalline structures 400 to 660 kilometers down. But water finds pathways. Water carves spaces. Subsurface voids exist globally. 2015 geological survey mapped hundreds of unexplained low-density regions deep underground. The interactive map was taken offline after 6 days. The researchers were threatened with legal action. Deep underground military bases exist. The government acknowledges some. Cheyenne Mountain, Raven Rock. But seismic data shows unexplained voids beneath other installations. Classified. Why build bases thousands of feet deep? Not for protection from surface weapons. We don't have weapons that penetrate that deep. You build that deep to reach something, or to monitor something that's already there. The truth governments are hiding isn't that aliens exist. It's that Earth is already inhabited, not just on the surface, below, in the hollow spaces, in the water-filled caverns hundreds of kilometers down, in the network of passages that ancient humans discovered and tried to map. A civilization, advanced, old, separate from surface humanity, not extraterrestrial, ultra-terrestrial. They've been here the entire time, long before we built our first cities, possibly long before we existed as a species, and occasionally they emerge. They observe, particularly after 1945. Why 1945? Because that's when we detonated atomic weapons. Trinity test, Hiroshima, Nagasaki. Nuclear explosions create seismic waves, deep seismic waves, waves that penetrate far into the Earth. We got their attention, not because we achieved spaceflight, because we developed weapons capable of threatening the deep structure of the planet itself. Weapons that could destabilize the very spaces where they live. UAP encounters increased dramatically after 1945. Not a coincidence. We showed them we were dangerous, to ourselves, and potentially to them. So they watch, they emerge. They demonstrate technology far beyond ours as a warning. You're not alone, and you're not the most advanced. And governments know. They've known since at least 1947. Byrd's expedition encountered them in Antarctica, Recovery operations began, not of extraterrestrial crash sites, of technology from something that lives here. Deep underground military bases aren't just built for our protection. They're interfaces, contact points, possibly negotiation sites, because if something has lived beneath the surface for millennia, and we're drilling deeper, building deeper, detonating weapons that shake the planet's structure, we're encroaching on their territory, and they're responding. The question was never, are we alone in the universe? The question is, are we alone on this planet? And the answer is no. We never were. We've been sharing Earth the entire time. We just live on the surface. They live below. In the network we're only beginning to discover. The network we're told doesn't exist. The network that ancient cultures described, the Nazis searched for, that Soviet scientists drilled into and immediately sealed off. It's real. It's vast. It's inhabited. And now that we know it's there, now that we've pushed too deep, drilled too far, detonated too many weapons, now we have to decide what happens next, because they're not leaving. This is their planet too. We just forgot. But they remember, and they're done hiding.